The Fate of Frank McKenna by William Carleton. There lived a man named McKenna at the hip of one of the mountainous hills which divide the country of Tyrone from that of Monaghan. This McKenna had two sons, one of whom was in the habit of tracing hares on Sunday, whenever there happened to be a fall in the snow. His father, it seems, had frequently remonstrated with him upon what he considered to be a violation of the Lord's Day, as well as the general neglect of Mass. The young man, however, thought otherwise harmless and inoffensive, and was the matter quite insensible to paternal reproof, and continued to trace wherever the avocations of labor would allow him. It so happened upon that Christmas morning, I think the year 1814, there was a deep fall of snow, and young McKenna, instead of going to Mass, got down on his cockstick, which is a staff much thicker and heavier at one end than at the other, and prepared to set out after his favorite amusements. His father, seeing this, reproved him again seriously, and insisted that he should attend prayers. His enthusiasm of the sport, however, was stronger than his love of religion, and he refused to be guided by his father's advice. The old man decided an altercation got warm, and finding that the son had obstinately scorned his authority, he knelt down and prayed that if the boy persisted in following his own will, that he might never return from the mountain unless he is a corpse. The imprecation, which was certainly as harsh as it was impious and senseless, might have startled many a mind from purpose that was, to say the least of it, at variance with a religion and the respect due to a father. It had no effect, however, upon the son, who is said to have replied that whether he ever returned or not, he was determined on going, and go accordingly he did. He was not, however, alone, for it appears that 3 or 4 of the neighboring young men accompanied him. Whether their sport was good or otherwise is not the purpose, neither am I able to say, but the story goes that towards the latter part of the day they started larger and darker hare than any had seen before, and that she kept dodging them before being bit by bit, leading him to suppose that every succeeding cast of the cockstick would bring her down. It was afterwards observed that she also led them into recesses of mountains, and although they tried to return her course homewards, they could not succeed in doing so. As evening advanced, the companions of McKenna began to feel the fall of pursuing her further, and to perceive the danger of losing their way in the mountains should night or snowstorm come upon them. They therefore proposed to give over the chase and return home. But McKenna would not hear it. "If you wish to go home, you may," he said. "As for me, I'll never leave the hills till I have her with me." They begged and entreated of him to desist and return, but all to no purpose. They appeared to be what the Scotch called fey, that is, so to act as if they removed some impulse that leads to death, and from some influence of which man cannot withdraw himself. At length, on finding him inconceivably obstinate, they left him pursuing the hare directly into the heart of the mountains and returned to their respective homes. In the meantime, one of the most terrible snowstorms ever remembered in that part of the country came on, and the consequence was that the self-willed young man, who had equally trampled his sanctions of religion and parental authority, was given over for lost. Soon as the tempest became still, the neighbors assembled in a body and proceeded to look for him. The snow, however, had fallen so heavily that not a single mark of a footstep could be seen. Nothing but one wide waste of white, undulating hills met the eye wherever it turned, and of McKenna no trace whatsoever was visible or could be found. His father, now remembering the unnatural character of his imprecation, was clearly distracted, for although the body had not been found, still by anyone who had witnessed the sudden rage of the storm, and he knew the mountains' escape or survival was felt to be impossible. Every day for about a week the large parties were out among the hill ranges seeking him, but to no purpose. At length there came a thaw, and his body was found in the snow wreaths, lying in the supine posture with a circle of which he had drawn around him with his cockstick. His prayer book lay open on his mouth, and his hat was pulled down so that to cover his face. It was unnecessary to say that the rumor of his death, or the circumstances under which he left home, created a most extraordinary sensation over the county, a sensation that was greater in proportion to the uncertainty occasioned by his not having been found either dead or alive. Some affirmed that he had crossed the mountains and was seen in Monaghan. Others, that he had been seen in Clones and Emmerdale or 5 Mile Town. But despite all these agreeable reports, the melancholy truth was at length made clear by the appearance of the body that had just been stated. Now, it has happened that the house nearest the spot where he lay is inhabited by a man named Daly, I think, but of name I am not certain, who was a herd or caretaker to Dr. Porter, then Bishop of Clore. The situation of this house was the most lonely and desolate looking that could be imagined. It was at least 2 miles distant from any human habitation, being surrounded by one side of the dreary waste of the dark moor. By this house lay a rout of those who had found the corpse, and I believe the door of it was borrowed for the purpose of conveying it home. Be this as it may, the family witnessed the melancholy procession as it passed through the mountains, and when in the place of the circumstances are all considered, we may admit to the ignorance and superstitious people, whose minds even upon ordinary occasions were strongly affected by such manners, it was a sight calculated to leave behind a deep and terrible impression. Time soon proved that it did so. An accident is said to have occurred at the funeral, which might be alluded to the midnight mass, and which is certainly fine keeping with the wild spirit of the whole melancholy event. When the procession had advanced to the place called Magullatiny, a large dark-colored hare, which was instantly recognized by those who had been with him on the hills as the identical one that led them to his fate. It is said to have crossed the road about 20 yards or so before the coffin. The story goes that a man stuck it on its side with a stone, and that the blow, which would have killed an ordinary hare, not only did no injury, but occasionally sounded to proceed from the body, resembling a hollow one emitting from the empty barrel that struck. In the meantime, the interment took place, and the sensation began, like every other, to die away in the natural progress of time, when, behold, a report ran across that wildfire-like, to use the language of the people, Frank McKenna was appearing. Seldom indeed was the rumor of an apparition composed of materials so strongly calculated to win popular assent, or to baffle regional investigation. As every man is not a Hibbert nor a Nicolai, so will many, until such circumstances are made properly intelligible, continue to yield credence to the testimony which was not convince the judgment on any other subject. The case in question furnished as fine a specimen of a true ghost story, freed from any superstition of imposture or design, as could be submitted but to a philosopher, and yet, notwithstanding the array of apparent attacks connected with it, nothing in the world is simpler or easier solution. One night, about a fortnight after his funeral, the daughter of Daly, the herd, a girl about 14, while lying in a bed, saw what appeared to be the likeness of McKenna, who had been lost. She screamed out, and covering her head with the bedclothes, told her father and mother that Frank McKenna was in the house. An alarming intelligence naturally produced great terror. Still, Daly, who, notwithstanding in belief of such matters, possessed a great deal of moral courage, and was cool enough to rise and examine the house, which consisted of only one apartment. This gave the daughter some courage, who, on finding that her father could not see him, ventured to look herself, and since she could see nothing of him herself, she soon fell asleep. Her father attributed what she saw to fear, and some accidental combination of shadows proceeding from the furniture, for it was a clear moonlit night. The light of the following day dispelled a great deal of the the apprehension, and comparatively little thought of it till evening again advanced, when the fears of the daughter began to return. They appeared to be prophetic, before she said, when night came, that she knew he would appear again, and according to the same hour he did so. This was repeated for several successive nights until the girl, from very hardy of terror, began to become so familiar with the spectre as to venture to address it. "In the name of God," she asked, "what is troubling you, or why do you appear to me instead of your own family relations?" The ghost's answer alone might settle the question involved, with the authenticity of its appearance being, as it was, the account of one of the most ludicrous missions ever a spirit was dispatched upon. "I am not allowed," he said, "to speak with any of my friends, for I parted with them in anger. But I'm come to tell you that they're quarreling about my breeches. A new pair that I got made for Christmas Day, and as I was coming up to trace the mountains, I thought the old ones could do better, and, of course, didn't put the new pair on me. By reason of appearing," he added, "is that you may tell my friends that none of them is to wear them, for they must be given to charity." The serious and solemn intimation from which the ghost was duly communicated to the family, and it was found to be the circumstances were exactly as it had presented them. This, of course, was considered as sufficient proof of truth of any mission. Their conversations now became not only frequent, but became friendly and familiar. The girl became a favorite of the spectre, and the spectre, on the other hand, soon lost all its terrors in her eyes. He told her that whilst his friends were bearing home his body, the handspikes or poles in which they carried him cut his back, and occasioned him with great pain. The cutting of the back also was known to be true, and strengthened the course and truth of the authenticity of their dialogues. The whole neighborhood was now in a commotion with this story and the apparition, and the persons inside it began curiosity to visit the girl in order to satisfy themselves of the truth that they had been hearing. Everything, however, was not corroborated, and the child herself, without any symptoms of anxiety or terror, artlessly related her conversation with the spirit. Hitherto their interviews had been nocturnal, but now the ghost found its footing made good. He put on a hearty face and ventured to appear by daylight. The girl also fell into states of syncope, and while her fits lasted, the long conversations with him upon the subject of God, the Blessed Virgin, and heaven took place between them. He was certainly an excellent moralist, and gave her the best advice. Swearing, drunkenness, theft, and every evil propensity of our nature were declaimed against the decree of the spectral eloquence, quite surprising. Common fame had now a topic dear to our hearts. Never was a ghost made more by his best friends than she made of him. The whole country was in a tumult, and I remember well the crowds that flocked to the lonely little cabin in the mountains, now the scene of matters so interesting and important. Not a single day passed in which I should think from 10 to 20, 30, or 50% persons were not present at these singular interviews. Nothing else was talked of, or thought of, and, as I can well testify, dreamt of. I would myself have gone to Daly's, were it not for the confounded misgiving I had, and perhaps the ghost might take such a fancy as to appearing to me, as he had taken to cultivate an intimacy with the girl. It so happens that when I see the face of an individual nailed down in the coffin, chilling and gloomy operation, I experience no particular wish to look upon it again. Many persons might imagine that the herd's daughter was acting as part of an impostor, but first originating and then continuing by such diversion, if one, however, as an impostor, it was the ghost, and not the girl. As her ill health and wasted cheek might well testify, the appearance of McKenna continued to haunt her for months. The reader is aware that he was lost on Christmas Day, or rather on the night of it, and I remember seeing her in such early part of the following summer, during which time she was still the victim of a deceased imagination. Everything, in fact, that could be done for her was done. They brought her to a priest named Donnelly, He lived in Bowenegert for the purpose of getting her cured, as he had the reputation of performing cures of that kind. They brought her also to the doctors, who also did what they could for her, but all in no purpose. Her fits were longer and of more frequent concurrence. Her appetite left her, and ere 4 months had elapsed, she herself looked like a spectre of the ghost himself could do for the life of him. It only now remains for me to mention the simple method of her cure, which was effected without either priest or doctor. It depended upon a word or two of advice given to her father by a very sensible man, who was in the habit of thinking on these matters somewhat and above the superstitious absurdities of some people. "If you wish your daughter to be cured," he said to the father, "leave the house you are now living in. Take her to some part of the country where she can have companions of her own class and states of life to mingle with. Bring her away from this place altogether, for you may rest assured that as long as there are objects before her eyes to remind her of what happened, she will not mend." The father, although he sat rent-free, took the excellent advice, even though the sacrifice of some comforts, for nothing short of the temptation of easy circumstances could have induced any man to reside in the wild and remote solitude. In the course of a few days he removed from it with his family, and came to reside amongst the cheerful aspect of enlivening intercourse of human life. The consequences were precisely as the man had told him. In the course of a few weeks the little girl began to find that the visits of the spectre were less like those of angels, few and far between. She was sent to school, and what with confidence derived from human society and superstition from new objects and images, she soon perfectly recovered. Ere long was thoroughly set free of the fearful creation of her own brain. The spot where the body of McKenna was found is now marked with a little heap of stones, which has been collected since the melancholy event of his death. Every person who passes throws a stone to stack upon the heap. By his old custom of practice and of what it means, I do not know, unless it be simply to mark the spot of a visible means by preserving the memory of the occurrence. Daly's house, the scene of the supposed apparition, is now a shapeless ruin, which could scarcely be seen if it were not for the green spot which was once a garden, and now still shines in the distance like an emerald, but with no agreeable or pleasing associations. It is a spot which no solitary schoolboy will ever visit, nor indeed will any unflinching believer in the due particular nonsense of ghosts, with which to pass without compassion. It is under any circumstances a gloomy and barren place, but when looked upon the connection of what we have just recited, it is lonely, desolate, and awful.